It is October 9th, 2023. This is a special little bonus podcast version of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto. Salam dostan aziz durud bar shoma. Here with Smart Pegah in the Roqe studio. Hi, Pegah.
Hello.
This is, we're going to be back with our regular big edition of Roqe on Thursday, which will be show 290. Let's call this episode 289.5. It's a bonus podcast. Nobel and Narges, IRI, and Hamas. And there's been a couple of developments in the last 3 days that we felt we could not let pass by without some comment. So we thought we'd do a bonus podcast. First of all, for those of you listening to us from Canada, which is where we're seated right now in Toronto, in Canada, happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
I know that Americans don't understand what we're talking about. Thanksgiving is not until November for them.
That's right.
But today is today Thanksgiving Day?
Yeah,
it's Thanksgiving Monday.
It's Thanksgiving Monday. I think Thanksgiving was technically yesterday.
Yesterday?
Right.
But anyway, for those of you celebrating Thanksgiving or giving thanks, happy Thanksgiving to you. There are big things happening in the world. This comes as no surprise to anyone that are not unrelated to Iran. And we felt like we had to do this bonus podcast we thought, let's do a little roundup here before we get to Thursday. The big things happening. I'm not only talking about Arsenal's stunning and well-deserved and gorgeous last-minute victory over Man City yesterday, although we do need to maybe devote a month of pods just to that, to the splendor of that victory yesterday. But no, we want to talk about Narges Mohammadi winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And then, pretty much one of the only things that could be more seismic than that is the absolutely devastating news coming out of Israel and Gaza over the last couple of days that has been, of course, dominating headlines and news coverage, and undoubtedly and unfortunately has an Iranian connection, at least when it comes to the abhorrent actions of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we're going to get to both of those items on this short little bonus podcast here as a roundup. We are coming to you on roqemedia.com, and our platforms are Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, CastBox. You know how people say my pronouns are? Our platforms are.
Exactly.
If you like to see some visuals with Roqe, switch over to YouTube. If you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and in Persian, check us out on Telegram, and you can support us by pressing the Support Us button on the Roqe Media site to go to our Patreon page, roqemedia.com, support us. All right, let's talk about Narges first. Hours after we posted our most recent episode of Roqe last Thursday night, Toronto time, which was featuring, I did an essay about Armita, we did a big roundup, and we had a big interview with Captain Chris Bernam here in the Roqe studio. Hours after that, I mean, basically when we woke up Friday morning, Toronto time, we got news that imprisoned Iranian human rights advocate Narges Mohammadi had won the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's right.
Big stuff. This was, without question, a big deal. It's not often that Iranians win the Nobel Prize, even less often, globally, that is, that it's handed to a woman. It immediately felt like a significant rebuke of the theocratic leadership in Iran. It immediately felt like a boost for those who've been part of the uprising for freedom and change in Iran. And I think she's only the 19th woman in the history of the 122-year-old prize to win the Nobel. So this is big stuff, and kudos to Narges Mohammadi, the head of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. Berit Reiss Anderson said, "We hope to send the message to women all around the world that are living in conditions where they are systematically discriminated. Have the courage, keep on going. We want to give the prize to encourage Narges Mohammadi and the hundreds of thousands of people who've been crying for exactly women, life, freedom in Iran." This was, you can tell something that's big news for the Iranian community when everybody's in social media was immediately posting it and sort of high-fiving. What was your reaction to this news, Pegah?
I think I was actually really happy when I saw the news, and not so much because of just the win in and of itself, but because of what it would mean and what I knew would upset the Islamic Republic. I mean, it wasn't so much about the win and about the fact that it was the Nobel Peace Prize. It was more about the fact that, this is definitely not what the Islamic Republic wants. The last thing they want is for an advocate sitting behind the prison walls at Evin to be nominated and then win as, or become the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and to have her face plastered all over all sorts of news outlets for people to be celebrating her, to be talking about the women life freedom movement.
And therefore asking who she is, exactly. Why is she in jail, what's happening with people in Iran. Yeah.
That's right. So because of that reason in particular, I was very, very happy.
In the first few hours after the announcement, there seemed to be, I feel like almost near universal celebration and excitement amongst Iranians online around the world. I took some solace in that after all the sort of...
Some unity, finally?
Yeah, it felt like there are a few things that really unite us. This might have been one of them.
Right.
And then it kind of dissipated. Like I thought, okay, the handing of the Nobel Peace Prize is kind of beyond something that can be critical or can once again reveal our disunity in the community, etc. Then there was some disunity. I mean, did it surprise you that there started to be dissent about even the handing out of Nobel Peace Prize to a person, an activist who's in jail in Iran?
Honestly, no. I wish I could say yes, but I knew it was just a matter of time before someone would come up and say something about her or about the prize or something about the controversy of the prize and all sorts of things, and that would cause, the age-old disunity that we've been seeing. But I think I agree with you. I think there was a split second, maybe towards the beginning, where I was looking through my Instagram and looking at everyone posting it. I was thinking, okay, well, at least, the first 100 people on my Instagram, everyone's on the same page. This is good news. Maybe we'll see more of it. But no, it doesn't come as a surprise to me, honestly.
Before we get to some of the issues around this, do you want to say anything about her, to tell us a bit about her in the sense that, we know this is a prominent voice of dissent in Iran. She's been in jail 12 times now, and she's in jail right now. What can you tell us about her?
So most recently, the sentence that she's actually serving right now is going to be for 10 years and 9 months. She was accused of actions against national security and propaganda against the state. Same bullshit thing that we've been hearing over the course of the last year and a bit. She was also sentenced to 154 lashes, punishment that we think has already been carried out, not sure. Of course, travel bans, other bans, all sorts of things. But despite all of this, even throughout her time, in Evin, she's been vocal. She's been sending recordings. I think there was a phone call recorded with her where you can actually hear the woman chanting the Women Life Freedom slogan. And in between, it cuts out and it says, this is a call coming in from Evin prison. And then again, it continues. And to hear that she's continuing this level of activism and to continue to be so brave, despite being literally in prison, being, whether it be lashes or all sorts of other, we've heard about sexual assault, we've heard about torture, we've heard about psychological issues, all sorts of things. Despite all of that, she continues to fight. And I think that's one of the things that is really important to talk about when we're talking about Narges, is this continuous bravery and, she's on this mission and she refuses to give it up. And I think it's just, more than anything, that is what we should be celebrating, the fact that this person is not giving up.
We did an interview with her about probably 2.5, 3 years ago here on Roqe. She's an engineer by training, right?
She actually, I think she has her degree in physics, and this isn't even where she started. It was, it's something that I think at some point in her career she became so passionate about, and then she went to prison, I think back in 2003, and she lost her engineering job. And then from there, I think it sparked this activism and this fight. And
she's recently, there was a documentary that she was behind that came out, that's been in the process. I mean, she's been, as you say, she's not just sitting silently in prison.
Exactly.
I mean, she's been, whilst being imprisoned, very outspoken. So there are folks who are saying this is fine but sort of meaningless and a symbolic gesture. And I saw one person tweet that, or X, that that this is like Shervin getting the Grammy. Like, who cares? It's a nice pat on the head.
Right.
What do you think of that?
You know what? I'm not naive to the fact that, there's a bigger problem or there's bigger things at play. I mean, we've constantly talked about quote unquote Western nations enabling the Islamic Republic, on one hand saying here's a Grammy, and then on the other having the president give funds to the Islamic Republic or to invite the Islamic Republic to New York, and all of these same things that we've talked about for so long. But to me, it's not meaningless, because even if it's for a day or two, you've got the whole world on Twitter or X or wherever talking about this individual. You're having people think or look up her name and say, who is this person? What has she done? What's going on? What is women life freedom? Even if it's someone who has never heard of it before, that's one extra person looking into what is actually happening and the atrocities that the Islamic Republic is doing is and I think that in and of itself is enough for me to say it's not meaningless.
Yes. I think, I'm of a couple of minds of it. First of all, Friday morning I was at the gym running on the treadmill, and it was one of those gyms where they have like a bunch of different TV screens all on different channels, and every single one of them was a sports one, but all of them that had news, one of those 24-hour, 24/7 news channels.
Right.
There was a couple of U.S. ones, Canadian one. All of them kept cycling this news of the Nobel Peace Prize has been won by, and then they would explain who she is, and then have a picture of her, and then they'd talk about the Islamic Republic of Iran, and then they'd talk about the lack of democracy and freedom. All of that is very valuable. That said, it does bother me that something like this can be used as an example of how the world is supporting the Iranian people. And I don't want to always dump on the President of the United States, because there's all kinds of other culprits, including our Prime Minister in Canada, we could look at in terms of contradictions and hypocrisy. But Biden made a statement, or Biden's made a statement, quote unquote. I don't know, who knows if he wrote it or even, saw it, but it was officially from the Biden president. This was the end of it. The United States will continue to stand with Ms. Mohammadi, with the brave people of Iran, with all of those around the world who are working with resilience and resolve to make our world more equal and free. Well, no.
Laughable.
You're doing deals with this murderous regime in Iran. I mean, sorry, but even the most staunch Democrat who loves Biden, and there's lots of reasons you can, whatever, we can look at the American administration right now and say they have been going out of their way to what is the words here? Continue to stand with the brave people of Iran.
They really haven't been.
Who agrees with that? So then it feels like this is an excuse. Then it does feel like another pat on the head, another White House Nowruz party, another Grammy, and now let's move on to the next thing. And by the way, do a deal with the regime and free up the $6 billion and whatever. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that these things can feel symbolic, but I do think this ain't Nobel Peace Prize is serious stuff.
Exactly.
And some of the reason why, I thought you make a really good point. I think the immediate argument to anybody who's going, no, who cares? The Iranian government cares.
Exactly.
Because they issued a statement saying, fuck you, Nobel Peace Prize, right? I mean,
exactly.
So clearly it meant something. And didn't our friend, the buffoon, the foreign minister, didn't Hossein Amir Abdullahian suggest that actually not only should the Nobel Peace Prize should have not been given to Narges Mohammadi, but spoiler alert, it should be given to Qasem Soleimani, not to mention he's been dead for a few years, right? So, I mean, they care, right?
They care a lot. I mean, look at it. This is the kind of thing that, if I'm being really basic about it, it just pisses them off so much. And I think that in and of itself is reason enough for this to be important to everybody else. Everybody except for the Islamic Republic. We should be celebrating this for the fact that it bothers them. It goes against their agenda. It creates, talk amongst everybody else in the world. There's more awareness brought to the scenario. That is exactly why I think, despite the organizations or the governments or whoever else, yes, we've talked about the problems with them. But aside from that, look at what this is doing. Look at the newsworthy topic that this has become, and as a result, people are asking about it, thinking about it, talking about it, all sorts of things.
It was an issue for some people, rightly or wrongly, and I'm curious to get your take, that Narges Mohammadi's politics. In other words, I think there's some sort of reformist angle with her, and some feel like they didn't want to support this victory because it's supporting her politics that they don't totally agree with. Let's take that one at a time. I mean, first of all, when something like this happens, should we care? I mean, assuming that they're against the regime, should we care what their politics are in terms of how they believe we need to achieve democracy in Iran?
You know, I generally am of the view that when this kind of thing happens, it's not the time to condemn. It's the time to, give praise and celebrate the win. I'm not saying the person necessarily, but the win and what it means and all these things that we've been talking about. So that's my kind of general view on this. But aside from that, in the case of someone like Narges Mohammadi, I don't think we can even call her a reformist anymore. I mean, the woman has been in prison, has been assaulted, has been lashed, has been fighting for exactly this from behind prison for how many years? How can we say that this individual...
I guess because she could still have a position that, for example, says we should sign the JCPOA or we should stop sanctions. Or
nothing that she has said in the recent years has pointed to that. What we're talking about when we're labeling her as a reformist or labeling her ideologies as a reformist ideology is from prior to, let's say, even the most recent sentencing of hers. And with regards to that, I think we've had this conversation before where 10 years ago many Iranians might have thought differently, but like we've said time and time again, the goalposts have been moved, right? We've seen so much happen over the course of the last 10, 15 years, especially kind of post-Green movement and all of that, that people's outlooks have changed on how we need to deal with the Islamic Republic. And the reality is, again, I don't know, I think with someone like Narges, I just have a really hard time saying that we can kind of condemn her for some ideology that she had way back when she's been fighting so hard for the fight.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go that far. I mean, I would just say with your first point, this was actually something that came up when the deal was made for the hostage or the prisoners to be released. The Americans who were in Iran who were jailed, the Iranian Americans who were then released. I saw this as well. Well, they were reformists, as if so we want them to languish in jail in Iran for unjust reasons. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. And I think in this case, I think you can say, well, I'm not sure I agree with the politics, but way to go.
Absolutely.
Cool. Good for you for getting the Nobel Peace Prize, because ultimately, presumably, your goal is the same as anybody who's been fighting for freedom and democracy in Iran.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we'd have to bring one of these people on who was saying that you were telling me that there was somebody who was like tweeting that I'm happy, but I'm also disappointed because this person's a reformist. And
well, on Twitter there was a lot of that. There was a lot of, or X, I keep saying Twitter, but there was a lot of that where
I don't even know what you're talking about if you say X. You have to say Twitter. Yeah.
I know. There was a lot of, I'm happy, but then at the same time there's a part of me or a percentage of me that, is questioning this because of the fact that this is still a reformist and I don't align myself with reformist ideologies.
And by the way, there was the opposite too. There was somebody who was a NIAC person saying, let this be a lesson to everybody that you were attacking her before and now she's, so there was, it's the same way that you, in the same way that when somebody dies, they say don't politicize the death, and some people say no, we should, and it feels like the Nobel Peace Prize being handed out now is an excuse to debate who was right and wrong in terms of reformism or not. Yeah.
And I think that actually takes away from the win and from what the win means, honestly. I don't think it's the time for, condemning the person and talking about their political ideologies and how they want to, ultimately come to what we all want, which is for the Islamic Republic to be gone.
So in summary, the answer to the question, is the Nobel Peace Prize being handed to Narges Mohammadi a big deal? Is
absolutely.
All right. I think that's true. And certainly there was a lot of excitement for many Iranians around the world. Now, and by the way, this does not mean, if we look at the example of Shirin Ebadi, this does not mean that she now has some sort of impunity, that she's going to be protected, that she's going to be, there's sometimes this idea that now that she's been, given this award and she's in the spotlight, that she'll be okay. I mean, what they've done with Jian Ghomeshi, from basically ultimately forcing her out of the country, but
Exactly.
I mean, in terms of the attacks and the threats and all of that stuff over the years, and delegitimizing her and everything. Again, this speaks to the regime cares about this stuff. And so it doesn't, this is not necessarily going to sadly make Narges Mohammadi's life easier.
No, and I actually think the opposite, especially in her case. I think it puts a bigger target on her back because she's in prison right now. She's not, out on the streets in Tehran somewhere. She's actually in prison. And so the access that they have to her is just so much easier to do whatever it is that they want. And we've seen time and time again that we don't necessarily know everything that goes on behind those prison walls, right? We get such limited information coming out of there that God knows what they can do to her right now.
I name-checked Jian Ghomeshi because she won the Nobel Prize in 2003.
The first Iranian woman.
So I just thought I'd show you that I know that.
Yes.
You didn't know that necessarily.
Definitely not.
Okay, so let's go to the other item that is huge and that is dominating all of the news channels and much of the discussion around the world, because this could actually change the world in terms of what's happening right now in Israel and in Gaza. And, let me just say this off the top. I cannot really speak to what's happening in Israel right now in terms of facts on the ground, the latest developments. I don't even think we should try, and even exactly what happened on the weekend. And certainly there is nothing more saddening and angering and deflating than seeing this footage of innocent people losing their lives for no reason in Israel and then in Gaza. It is so hard, and you don't need me to add superficial sentiments of sorrow for the state of the world. And I don't even feel qualified to talk about the nuances of all that is happening in Israel and Gaza, but we can talk about the involvement of the Islamic Republic of Iran, specifically with Hamas. What Hamas did, a surprise attack on Israel by land, by sea, all of the, this stuff. And for example, the attack on a bunch of people at a music festival, innocent people at a music festival, pretty unconscionable. And most certainly, I just want to say, implicates Iran. Have you been surprised, perhaps? I've seen a lot of support for Israel amongst Iranians around the world. Leaving aside whether understandable or not, I thought this is an interesting moment where there's been times in history where we wouldn't necessarily see this.
Right.
But now we are seeing Iranians of different stripes around the world, certainly online, showing a lot of sympathy, empathy, maybe support for Israel. What does that surprise you?
I don't know if I would say I'm surprised, but I definitely understand it. And the reason that I understand it is because it's kind of twofold. One is we've blatantly seen the Islamic Republic's involvement in this situation. We know that the Islamic Republic is supporting Hamas. And I think a lot of Iranians are understanding that or seeing that or hearing about it. And so that is maybe making them align or feel that sympathy or empathy for Israel. That's the first part. And the second part, honestly, I think Iranians are tired of seeing death like this, whether it's in Gaza or in Tehran or anywhere else in the world. I think we've been dealing with it for so long, especially or most recently in the last year and a half. We've been seeing so many, innocent children be killed at the hands of the Islamic Republic that when we see innocent children being killed elsewhere, it's almost like, it hits home a little bit differently.
There's people who've been very, very clear in their support for Israel and their belief in Israel as a democracy, as a beacon of that in the region. I would count Reza Pahlavi, the Shahzadeh, and Yasmin Pahlavi. They went there.
Right.
And they've been very clear. We support Israel, and I think there's a lot of people who support them that support Israel. So that's no surprise that, but it was interesting to see folks, for example, that I know around the world who are not necessarily monarchists or staunch Pahlavi supporters, tweeting or Xing, whatever, supporting Israel in this moment. And part of it, I wondered, was, there's so much anger that people are so fed up with the Islamic Republic. This has been 45 years, but certainly over the last year, as we know.
Right.
And we know that the proclaimed enemy, there isn't the speech that Khamenei does where he doesn't talk about the enemy, and it's usually if it's not the United States, it's Israel, right?
Exactly.
So the enemy of our enemy is our friend, right? So I wonder if there's some of that going on where it's just like, I don't know exactly what's happening in that region, but if it's the enemy of the Islamic Republic, I support them, right?
Yeah, that makes sense too, actually. And the other thing is that, we have leaders from Hamas just come out and kind of do a shout out to the Islamic Republic in their, I don't know if I want to call it speeches, but whatever it is, there's been numerous that we've seen. So it goes both ways. And I think for that reason, it definitely is the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
So the other thing that's happening and it's kind of like one of the precipitants for why I want to do this bonus podcast, because it just really pisses me off. Somewhere I want to say it's like the American left, but it's like it's like, we get it. The Biden administration did the deal, which included $6 billion. And now there's people, I don't know if it's because they want to, if they're actually sympathetic to Iran and the regime and they think that's somehow progressive to be like supporting them. I don't know. Or because they're so defensive about the Biden administration or the Democrats being attacked or something that they want to just, clarify that these people who are twisting themselves in knots to explain that the regime in Iran could not have been behind this. It's like,
who the fuck cares? I'm sorry.
Do you really need to know that, Iranian mullahs were on the phone giving the orders to know? The Iranian regime itself is proclaiming its agenda, its ideological agenda. It has made transparent. We want to spread our gospel across the region, around the world, in fact, and that includes Hamas and Hezbollah. They're not being shy about this. You don't have to guess this, right? So how you look at that and go, well, hang on a second.
Let me clarify.
Do we know that Iran could possibly be behind this? As you say, who cares?
Yeah,
right? And it's the same for me with the $6 billion. First of all, to those dear folks on X and et cetera saying, no, the $6 billion is for humanitarian. This. It was only released for humanitarian. It's just like, really?
Yeah.
Really? You really believe this? You really believe this? When the regime, when Raisi comes to New York and does the interview and says, no,
everything is a humanitarian.
We'll do what we want with that money. You still, no, that's for humanitarian.
Yeah.
And who even cares what it's allocated for? You give that $6 billion goes to the regime, and the regime decides what to do with it. And I even saw somebody making a technical argument about how the time between that deal and this strike was too short for the $6 billion to be.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, what does that matter? The point is, at least for those who want to make the argument, don't enable the regime, and by releasing funds or not imposing sanctions or whatever you are enabling, it doesn't matter,
That's right. Yeah, I just pass by those comments and those tweets and everything else because, again, I'm of the same thought.
But that's a big conversation that's going on in America right now.
It really
about
is.
Whether, it's interesting how this strike on Israel and now the counterstrike and all that's happening there has actually enlivened the conversation about the $6 billion, which wasn't really registering that much amongst non-Iranians, policymakers, et cetera. There's an editorial in the New York Times and somebody disagreed with it and whatever, but there wasn't. Now it's kind of, that's becoming a bigger deal. Yeah.
But I think the reason I'm saying I kind of skip past that is because it's one of those nuances that I feel like non-Iranians are dissecting, whereas most Iranians are of the same thought of, the money's going to the Islamic Republic. That's all that matters. That essentially is the biggest argument that we've been trying to have is, you're giving $6 billion to the Islamic Republic. I don't care what it is that you're saying you're giving it to them for, or what it is that they're saying they're going to spend it on.
And you have to, it's a little bit like the Armita thing, you know, because I got some people pushing back on the essay last week and going, well, we don't know the facts of Armita. Didn't her mother come out and say, actually, she's fine? And it's like you have to know how many times you've been screwed by this, how many times they've lied, how many times they've destroyed lives, how many times they've attacked innocent people. You have to know this. And Iranians do know this because people around the world, inside Iran and outside, have lived through it, to know that $6 billion is not going to go to humanitarian aid in Iran, right?
That's exactly it.
And that's actually laughable. But somehow maybe to a non-Iranian who hasn't been living through this, they think you're kind of being stubborn or bullheaded or not open enough to, you know...
I think the difference is that no Iranian will ever give the Islamic Republic the benefit of the doubt. That's what it is. Whereas, and again, it's because of the experiences. It's because of the past.
Some will, but they are on some level clients of the no objective Iranian, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
There was one other thing I wanted to talk about, and that is kind of why this is even important and why it's important that Iran is somehow involved in all this. And it's kind of the bigger picture. And I think it's because, or, you know, I don't necessarily think, there's a lot of people out there who think, and I might be of the same view, is that, you know, we've seen the Israel-Saudi relations kind of moving towards a very historic place. We've never seen them be trying to engage in peace deals the way they have, to become as friendly as they have recently. And I think what's happening, or what's been happening in the last couple of days, is destabilizing that and bringing about more widespread anger in the Arab world, which is definitely going to have an influence on these relations. And that's something that the Islamic Republic would strongly benefit from. So to anyone who's arguing that, you know, Iran's not, or the Islamic Republic's not involved, or this doesn't benefit them and all that, it absolutely does. And it goes back to what you were saying about them wanting to spread the gospel. Well, this is exactly it. So just another point on this entire situation.
I fear for where all of this goes. You know, first of all, it's been horrendous.
Yeah. Extremely
distressing and sad for the people who've lost their lives. But where this goes to now in the coming days, as it escalates and potentially escalates into a war beyond the borders, it's really, really scary stuff and
deeply saddening for sure.
Hard to believe that Iran, you know, if it does escalate, won't somehow be playing a role, and that's that the world will be feeling the implications of what Iranian people have felt with this regime is scary stuff. Okay, that's our bonus podcast.
Yes.
We're here on Thursday with our regular edition of Roqe, episode 190 coming up. Thanks, Pegah.
Thank you.
This is full time for Roqe for today. Remember, you can go to our website, roqemedia.com. Thanks to the team who put this show together, Anahita, Pegah, Roham, Omid, Parisa Kaveh. Thank you to all of you out there supporting us and sharing our content. Subscribe if you've not done so already. Find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizun Bashin.